Alright, it's day 2. Here's where I'm at. Yesterday I got the material cut. Here's some of the pieces in waiting right down there. And the perimeter frame tacked up. And a couple of these cross members in place, 3 of them. 2 are the 1x2 steel, which is the same as the outer frame. And then 1 is a 2x2. And I explained that yesterday, why I used the 2x2 there. And I have 4 more to put in. So 1 there, 1 there, 1 here, and then 1 more down there. So the cross members will be at 16-inch on center, except for at the very end. This one will be kind of a short span. Looks like about 8 or 9 inches. But otherwise 16-inch on center. And this is a 5x10, so not only do I need to use 8-foot sheets and have a butt joint on top of this 2-inch tube, but the sheets will be 4 feet wide, not 5 feet wide. So I'm going to need to put in another system of braces, either right down the middle and do 2.5 foot strips of plywood, or do a 4 foot and a 1 foot and offset the longitudinal, I guess you would call it, brace that runs the length of the trailer chassis. Haven't decided that yet, haven't cut those yet, but that's a pretty simple matter. That bag sitting on top of that sawhorse down there is just loaded with some equipment acting as ballast, steadying the sawhorse. So when I get these things put in various configurations, it doesn't want to tip that sawhorse over or have the frame drop off there. I'm working on top of these sawhorses because it sure beats crawling around on the floor. A lot easier on my knees and my back. Takes a little bit of advanced planning and but some finesse in order to keep it balanced on top of these sawhorses without it tumbling to the ground. If this thing hits your toe or hits the ground in general, it's just not really good for it. So I'm trying to keep it on top of these sawhorses as long as I can. I did have all this material supported on the sawhorses before it was welded up when I was in the process of prepping the steel. And for prep, what I do is I just wipe everything down with acetone to clean off the coat of oil that commonly is applied on these tubes when you at the steel distributor or whatever, at the mill. And then I just gently deburred them once I cut them using a orbital sander and 100 grit sandpaper. I used to do that with an angle grinder and flap discs, and I just found that an orbital sander worked just as well. It takes a little bit longer, but it's a lot easier to control and gives pretty much the same results. Just moves a little slower than an angle grinder, so it takes a little longer. But customers aren't getting charged by the hour in this shop, so doing things as fast as possible isn't really that much of a consideration. And it's a little easier on my ears and my neighbor's ears. And so I use an orbital sander mostly to clean the mill scale and any foreign substances off these tubes before I weld them. And then this will all have to be painted. So on some projects I might just kind of deburr and sand the ends of the tubes where they're going to be welded. But in this case I sanded the full length of every tube just to make this painting process go a little more smoothly, literally and figuratively. I'll need to probably rub everything down with a green Scotch-Brite pad prior to painting, but I shouldn't have to do any heavy-duty grinding or sanding prior to paint. Haven't decided how I'm going to paint it yet. I'll probably use some kind of self-etching primer that's intended for bare metal, and then spray it with some type of metal paint, basically Rust-Oleum or equivalent, and I'll do that with a air-powered HVLP spray gun. I won't use cans. There's just too much area that needs to be painted, and with cans it's really wasteful. A project like this would probably take, just this piece alone would probably take 6 to 8 cans, and it's just easier to do with the HVLP gun. I've had pretty good success with it on other projects, nothing of this scale, but it should work really well here. But that's down the road. So anyway, this is day 2, and the next step is to put these 4 cross members in place. Okay, my next setup is in place. I've got the Fireball Mega Square clamped into place on this joint, and then you may notice I have a C-clamp in here with a piece of tube stock underneath the joint. And the reason I do that is once I flush up these 2 tubes at the top using the 1, 2, 3 block, I then pin that tube in place with this C-clamp and tube underneath. And that allows me to come down here and flush up this intersection here. And normally, if I didn't pin the other side, any adjustments I made here would be translated to the other end in the opposite direction. So basically what happens is the tube just kind of seesaws as you tap each end up and down. It'll just seesaw within the frame. But by pinning this one over here, it allows me to make some adjustments on this end without influencing the position of the other end. So they both should be flush, and I've confirmed that with the 1, 2, 3 blocks. So I don't know if that's the official way to do things. It's worked for me through trial and error, and also some things I've seen online. YouTube channels, as I mentioned, are kind of like one of the main ways that I've learned how to do this work. The aforementioned Jason at Fireball Tools, who is the inventor and seller of these squares. And then another channel I've watched a lot of is Jimbo's Garage. Learned a lot from Jimbo. He's down the road, not too far from me, but I've never met the man. But his YouTube channel is great, so I do recommend that one, and I'll drop a link to it. But anyway, so this one's in place. I'm going to go ahead and tack it in, and then just have a few more to do, just like this again. And the initial assembly of this component of the trailer will be complete. Alright, here's the chassis fully assembled. And everything is tacked in place. All these joints have 4 to 5 good tacks on each side of the tubing. So the next step is to flip the entire assembly over and start the weld up. I'll start by welding this joint on the underside, because that joint is completely unsupported right now. So that's the priority, is getting some support on that joint. And then I'm going to take the easy way out, at least for me, and I'm going to stand the assembly up on one of the side rails. So, basically take it and stand it up on the ground so it's standing vertically, and that will let me weld each one of these seams in the horizontal position. So while they can be welded in the vertical position by better men than me, as Inspector Harry Callahan once said,
man's got to know his limitations.
and for me, welding in the vertical position is really not optimal. I can do it, but the results are not pretty, and more importantly, I'm not sure if they're as structurally sound as what I'm capable of welding on the horizontal. So as long as I have the option to weld horizontal, I'll take it. And in this case, I do have that option. The only downside is I have to work on my hands and knees, but it'll go pretty quick and it won't be too bad. So that's the plan from here, is to flip it over, weld out the bottom of each tube where it meets the side rail, and then stand it up and do the main welds, I would call them, in the horizontal position.